Patrick Debois has been a big influence in the DevOps and DevSecOps space, and he's been pretty outspoken along that journey about some of the challenges and potential issues it actually brought about, as long as how to do it securely. And now Patrick is providing those insights and experience into the revolution that we're going through with AI, how we dealt with the cloud native revolution, and how now we're dealing with the AI revolution when it comes to development and code and deployment. So I was fascinated to get Patrick's opinion on this. So without further ado, let's get into Leaders and Legends with Patrick Debois. Patrick, thanks so much for joining me here today. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
It's my pleasure to be here. Been a long time in the making this podcast, but yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, awesome. I want to start off kind of doing a little bit of a curveball because there's been some recent news that is unavoidable recently. Your background is, deeply in DevOps, DevSecOps, and now you're kind of a front thinker in kind of AI. Recently, there's been some AWS outages, which has caused a fair bit of chaos. Famously, AWS announced that they had kind of relinquished 40% of their DevOps team to replace them with AI. This kind of fits perfectly in your wheelhouse. So I'm curious to see, do you have any comment on kind of what we've just kind of witnessed? Do you think that this is kind of something that possibly could have happened anyway? Do you think that the transition to kind of AI for DevOps is too soon, or what's your kind of opinion on what we just saw without being too speculative?
So my first reaction to these outages is usually what is called in the community called hug ops, right? If you've been somewhere responsible for a production system, this is not your best day, right? You'll learn from it, but it's like it requires a bunch of empathy of you trying to solve something at scale, right? And I guess that's what a lot of people dismiss is, hey, Amazon or whoever has a lot of money and they should be able to do, a very good job at, staying up, and they have all the IDs and all kind of things. There is just a certain sometimes alignment of events that you didn't foresee, and it kind of very similar to, hey, a user does an unexpected thing or an operator. There is still kind of some pieces that are human-based. There are pieces that are automated, but it doesn't matter too much. Like both can go wrong for various reasons, right? So yes, I assume companies prepare for that, but there is also kind of a certain cost with preparing things, and some things, you can't just like foresee. So I'm kind of pretty much on the side like, was this avoidable? Hindsight is easy, right? Oh yes, we could have done this, but in reality, that's kind of not how it works. And as long as we're kind of learning, and that's usually the thing, like, will it happen again, or the same thing, or something else? Will we kind of have prepared for that? Is it actually worth preparing for? I know the impact is big, so you don't hear me say that, yes, that happens, but yeah, a small thing can lead to several things. So I have maybe more empathy than other people just using it. And I'm still okay with that. Now, the conclusion that you draw, like, hey, people got fired, or is AI kind of not like, kind of doing that? I know, I don't follow the path in a way that, is this related to people being fired? No. Is this due to stress? I have no story on the inside. Is this something that happened for a reason? Was this even AI? Like the whatever I found on the internet, it says like, oh, it's a DNS problem, but it's a DNS problem with like 7 events happening at the same time. So try prepare like scenarios kind of on that side. But yeah, anyway, we're kind of, it's always hoping that it doesn't happen again. But over my career, I had it. Hey, system goes down. We have to restore from a backup. It takes like a day to restore the backup. A month later, you thought we'd learn from that. same thing happened. Right? So,
Yeah.
um,
Well, look,
anyway,
I mean,
I'm
it's
okay
all
with it.
about improving, isn't it?
Yeah,
And
indeed. Yeah,
and things like this are always kind of. I mean, I don't want to say they're inevitable, but when we're always pushing the boundaries of what we're doing in various ways, then we're going to find new stress points.
yeah. And I think the scale and the impact is something we should kind of reflect on. Like, hey, this was one region, but then all of the users kind of reusing that region and being the impact.
Uh-huh.
But you can't blame them. They have multiple regions, but the customers only use a single region, something like that. So, but yeah, you assume it works. You don't want to put in the work to kind of make it redundant. Some companies did, and they survived, and others didn't. It's a risk game, right? That
Yeah.
we're taking.
Yeah. And as much as you can lay fault at AWS, there is a shared responsibility, in this for yourself. So we could, yeah, I think that's a good conclusion from that. To move away from the speculation in the news today, I really wanted to get this opportunity to discuss with you and pick your brains a little bit about this big shift that we're seeing in development. And one of the reasons why you're such a good guest to have on here is that you've gone through this shift of DevOps and going to cloud native, and you've had a lot of opinions about that process, and now you're becoming let's use some tacky words, thought leader in this AI space. So I want to get into the shift that we're going through now.
Mm-hmm.
So we're moving into this, not just vibe coding, but AI assisted coding. We're also using AI for our infrastructure and multiple things. What are kind of the big changes that we're going to be going through immediately? How will our processes, our systems, and how we work change, introducing AI? And I know that's a impossibly big question, but I'm going to try and let you have a stab at it.
So, when AI came into our kind of realm of coding, um, we started to explore like what the kind of difference were that we were doing compared to what we currently were doing. And as with the technology of LLMs, it is about code generation, right? So the whole starting point was, hey, we can do faster code generation, ask it something, and it has that kind of seamlessly infinite kind of wisdom of doing stuff. Now, when people start coding with some of those tools, they learn that they still have to do the review in that way. Now, you can, like you mentioned, you can do vibe coding and just say accept, and that's all. But if you're anywhere serious, you are responsible for running things. And that's maybe like my background of DevOps is, yes, okay, this is good on your laptop and you're done. But what if it happens? And being prepared for when it fails and kind of understanding and being responsible, that is that part. Now, I have written like a blog post around the form patterns of AI native dev, and it's mostly kind of explaining where people are like moving in their head. And so the first thing they notice is they are less about producing the code themselves, but becoming a manager as such. And in the way that we are managing coding agents, or similar to our interns that say, hey, this is good, this is bad, you should do this. And maybe we still jump in. But that kind of like puts quite some load on us because we are the reviewer as such. And so the more it generates, the more we're doing the reviewing, the less we still do the work. And so we are responsible for when it fails. We're responsible for how much it costs us. We're responsible for anything, but we're not doing that work. So kind of that is probably the first shift that people feel when they kind of start moving with the code and doing stuff. This is ironically a story that I tell is all the dev people have now become an ops person because they receive code from people like somebody they didn't do it themselves. They are responsible and they have to figure out like how to bring it to production. But yeah, that's the first part.
Yeah, I really love that analogy. And when I was kind of preparing for this and looking at some of your talks and your posts and everything, and looking at the four patterns of AI native development, the idea really resonated me of when I first started thinking about AI generated code. I'm kind of thinking about me typing into ChatGPT, generating code, pasting it into, VS Code, that type of thing. I know we have Cursor now and it integrates, but you transformed that into my brain of thinking about, okay, now if we think about AI agents and these tools as, as people, we are instructing them what to do. So the direction of the application comes from us. The responsibility of review is still us. So almost in a way, it feels like AI coding is going to give us more work than previous before. And sure, the output may be more, but this idea that we're going to be in coding Monday to Tuesday and have the rest of the weekend, I think that's kind of sailed out the door.
So like all kind of technology trends, they have a way of shifting complexity around. Like what you gain in the one thing, you may be losing another part. And so depending on how important you find certain things, you wonder. Now, obviously, the hope is that AI will get like quite good. And so the review is kind of like less tedious and it gives good results. Now, the downside is, and it was, if I draw again the analogy with DevOps, if you have your pipeline working and your security is working and all good, you kind of become a little bit more relaxed. So it's ironic because the more secure you are, the less you actually care about your security, right? The more you care about, like, you're automated, the less you care actually about the actual process. And within DevOps, we had a concept called chaos engineering, where it was almost like we were deliberately inducing faults in our architecture to keep training, to keep us on our toes. And so it's quite similar to this. Like, yes, we do the code review, but if you're not writing, how do we actually keep up and still understand what good looks like? So maybe that shifts to training. Maybe that shifts into preparing, like a fireman, like, dealing with an issue or somebody training. So we might not be like saving time on the generation and maybe on the review, but then we have to spend the time on training. Now, you don't have to. That's the choice. That's your risk. If you just say yes, 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 that's fair. And that's kind of like where you can take different directions, as maybe we did in the past, to go with that.
I'm curious what you think about something, because you mentioned a point there that just sparked something inside me. You said if we're not on the tools anymore, if we're not coding, how can we keep our tool starts to do an effective review? So one thing I'm kind of curious about is, when AI writes code now, the one thing that I notice is that it's extremely well commented. It breaks down exactly what it does, and it's very human readable. It's clearly designed for me. At some point, there kind of almost is going to be a shift where these AI models stop writing code for our benefit and start just writing efficient code. Perhaps it's trained in, perhaps that happens naturally. Do you think we'll get to a point where like code may be less and less understandable to us? I mean, you could even go so far as, an AI model writing a binary for us to review. Would we get there, or do you think that is kind of a different direction that we will end up in ultimately?
I think it boils back to that remark of review. Like, why do people have tests? It's not actually only for the sake of testing. It's also when things fail that you actually are able to see what fails at what level, right? So having that, why do we put things in multiple files? Because like if everything is one file of the code, we can't understand. We can't like mentally grok what the code is doing. Now imagine that the AI is, churning away and like crunching code and like the lead code that we had, right? Like completely understandable, and it generates. How are you going to do the review? Then comes back to that. Like, how do you say yes, no? If you don't understand this, and then when things fail in production, how are you actually going to make a right call on how to solve this, right? Now, the flip argument that I see sometimes on the internet is, well, we're just going to, at that time, ask AI the questions that we need to ask. But like, if you don't know what question to ask, that's a hard thing, right? So give me all the options that you think might go wrong. Like, yeah, that could be a lot and it could be wrong. And that's one of the things that it is so happy to give us a result. It's one of those things with the LLMs. Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you. Yes, I will definitely do this. And next time I will do better. It's not like we should not treat it as a human and kind of like speaking in the secret language as such. It's still a prediction thing. And that's why with this technology of the Gen AI, like maybe there's new technology or other technology that we combine it with, we cannot rely on saying this is going to be 100% correct. We don't need to understand, just push the button to production. Even with all the tools and the pipelines, that is true. Now, another aspect of this is, and kind of in the pattern number 2, I mentioned like, okay, instead of telling it like exactly how to code, we just want to specify what we want, the intent, right? And that's great. We, as a human, we kind of get a ticket. Our product owner says, please do this, please do that. They don't care too much about how the code is written. As long as it passes this test, the users are happy and they can work from that. So people have been experimenting by saying, hey, regenerate the code. Completely different way of coding, still passes the test. Is that good enough? Right? In our CI/CD system, we tend to believe that when we push things through tests, it is okay enough to probably, when we're really in the continuous delivery stage, to push it when it succeeds to prod. The problem is, if the AI writes the tests and rewrites the tests, we don't know, right? So that come back to that human understanding of making that call, as far as I believe. Now, there's the industry hope, as you know, let's throw a lot of money at it, and maybe we'll succeed. And then I'll bring up the story of the self-driving car, right? Okay, it works in certain cases and certain kind of like setups and kind of configurations. And that's probably what we're still looking for. In what cases are we confident enough to kind of accept this? Like ADAR is one of the coding tools agents, and it just accepts and does a commit. It doesn't ask you to, it just already does the opposite. Like, if you don't like it, revert it, but I'm going to commit, right? So it's interesting to see the confidence level. And for me, it is always about, okay, what's your risk appetite? And that is something we know in the security world. Yes, you can secure your whole house and put it in concrete and nobody can enter. You cannot live like that, right? So it's kind of where you draw that line. And maybe it's about re-architecting your application. So certain pieces have a certain risk profile, other pieces have another risk profile, and you deal with that in another way. So yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And at some point, we can't allow to lose, to give up control. We gets to a real Terminator situation there. But
Usually.
you can see, I could for the first time see the path that we could take to get there. One of the things that you've kind of referenced when talking about the transition into DevOps and into cloud native was a lot of the pains that kind of it took to get there. And whilst this revolution promised, and I believe ultimately delivered on kind of efficiencies and securities, there was a lot to get through to get there. So now that we're going through this transition into AI native, where do you think the major pain points are going to be that organizations will face, or developers will face, that they're going to have to overcome, and that's going to cause a little bit of chaos in the process?
So we're specifically talking about AI native coding, right? Because otherwise it's quite broad. But a lot of people are trying to obviously get the AI to do what they want. And what's kind of ironic is, if you distill those patterns, they boil down to good engineering practices. So if I'm writing code in one file compared to multiple files, that's something I would like not do as a good engineering. If I write code without tests, I can actually not see if somebody changed the code, whether it's still going to keep working. If I overload the context window of the coding agents with too much information, it is going to fail, like a human overloading with too many features at the same time. So you need to kind of take smaller steps. If your documentation is not up to date, the AI will do bad things. If you have 7 different coding conventions, or like ways that you structure after restructure your code, the AI is going to get confused, which is now kind of the standard that I should do. So that's kind of like, for a lot of people, that aha moment, like, hang on, like we talked about technical debt, bad documentation, all that stuff. And so you tell me that to get the most out of AI, I actually need to do those practices. Ironically enough, people do it for the AI, which weren't doing it for the humans as such. So that's a good thing, I would say, that come out of that.
Yeah, I immediately kind of think to all the crappy documentation I've had to kind of sift through it, and now it's kind of like, I guess perhaps we could say that you have opportunity to invest more in things like that when you have the AI there.
There's an example of let's say an agent called Devin, that let's say if you chat all the time with your agent, it all of a sudden says like, oh, it gave you a suggestion, and you say, well, that's not true. Like, please change this. And he says like, you know what? Should I update the documentation with this new information? Or I think this is important. Should we document this? So this becomes like a seamlessly kind of documentation update with a live kind of execution by the agent. So that's something that's quite powerful to eventually lead to almost like a knowledge management, where people kind of keep track of what they tried, the features they did, and all those things that are often in engineers' head kind of now become more tangible and reusable. If your engineer maybe leaves, knowledge still there, good documentation. You want to onboard a new engineer, that information is there and up to date. So there are kind of ways that AI can help us in improving that kind of like chore that we used to have, like, documentation later, tests later, stuff like that. And now we kind of see a different value into that.
One really interesting topic that you've talked about, you've done some posts about this, you've also mentioned it in some of your talks, is kind of team typologies. Well, topologies. I'm forgetting how to speak English for a minute.
I love that.
But what I've heard is team topologies.
Yeah.
And why I thought this was interesting is that it kind of took a framework that existed and something that was structured. And a lot of kind of AI is, when we're moving so quickly, everything feels pretty chaotic. Like, I feel, perhaps it's just me, I feel like I'm hanging on to the back of a very fast moving train, going like, holding on, swinging on the Eurostar, and just trying to keep up with everything. But I thought, can you explain kind of this framework, or this idea of how it can actually help kind of put some structure around this and manage some of these pain points as we go through?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think when I talked about this, it was more about scaling AI inside of your company and kind of working on that. Now, if we think about team topologies as a way that collaboration works, one of the ways that team topologies not prescribes, but describes is using a platform and then feature teams on top of that platform. And that's the collaboration. Now, the way we did it in cloud was, hey, we have that cloud team that kind of is actually running the Kubernetes platform or something like that. And they kind of help the devs kind of run on that. Now, instead of making everybody a DevOps, where some people might have dreamt from, we went to, hey, let's kind of enable a champion similar to a security champion in a certain team and scale this out. And a lot of the current narrative is also thinking about the platform as a product. And in my head, a platform team actually takes care of three pieces. One is obviously running that platform or infrastructure or APIs or whatever you call it, right? There's a piece of running things. The second thing is about enabling your users, whether that's your developers, your product owners, your external users, kind of on that platform. And the third piece is the governance. So if you look at all those three things, this is also what you do when introducing AI. The new stack with AI had new components. We needed a RAG database. We needed to have connectors. We needed prompt repositories. We needed to have kind of a guardrail system for AI and so on. All infrastructure. Second piece was enablement. Well, the devs didn't know what kind of model to use, and is it secure, and is it correct, and can they have access to newer models to do testing and sandboxes and play around, and education. Very similar as we taught them with cloud and DevSecOps to learn and have a better understanding. And then with the governance, it was the same thing. Like, hey, you cannot just install any model. You cannot install any tool. You cannot leak your code to kind of one of the things if there's no opt-out. There's some legislation like the European kind of AI Act. And so kind of that awareness and governance is quite similar. So the scaling is simple. You go to one team, which is similar to your first customer. You listen what they want. Then hopefully you have 2 or 3 others that can actually help you understand how you're going to scale this out in your company. And then you kind of build that like shared service, and then you scale it out to the rest of the organization. So the same patterns apply to, hey, I'm introducing clouds. Hey, I'm actually introducing DevSecOps, and I'm introducing Gen AI platform. MLOps went a little bit different. They kind of kept in their own island, but it is because that was maybe not that close to the devs in general. Similar maybe to like the mobile team or something that was more like a kind of a global theme on certain things. But that scaling concept of the team topologies is applicable in that way of scaling out like a new transformation. And in this case, it's the AI usage transformation or kind of the impact of that.
Yeah, and I think the reason why I resonated kind of with that too is that it just, I think a lot of people struggle with what to do and how to do this, and because it's all moving so fast and so new, it's difficult to kind of come up with a playbook. But if we look back, we've actually gone through changes, big changes in software development a lot and in organizations, and to kind of come back to a lot of that, it brings it to, oh, we've actually dealt with change, and we can deal with change in a similar structured manner as we have done before.
Yeah, that's true. Ironically enough, the team topologies used to be called the DevOps topologies. So there's that, but actually before that, there was like the agile transformation, and it was quite similar, but with different kind of like, hey, I had the first agile team, and it's scaling out and multiple teams.
Yeah.
So it's just a way of doing like introducing something new to an org or scaling a transformation. So
I want to kind of keep on this, but I'm conscious of your time. But I have to ask a couple of other questions before I let you go. But one of the very interesting things is that all of a sudden, metrics and how we measure success and everything has changed dramatically. We can't kind of measure success. I don't know whether it was true or not, but the story will kind of ring true, is that there was the idea that when Elon Musk took over X, he fired everyone that wasn't producing a certain amount of lines of code, every week. Doesn't matter. We don't need to talk about if that's true or not, but that is a metric that is fundamentally would be flawed to measure something by. How, when we go through this transition, how will the old measures and metrics that we used to measure success on or kind of progress, how will they change going forward?
I'd like to nuance that. It's not useless to measure it. It's not a good idea to only make decisions on top of that. So when you kind of like look at your pipeline, there's many aspects that you'd like to measure, and based on like where you put like certain kind of value in, let's say I'm looking at like how many lines of code did they write, and there's a certain truth to this, is if somebody never touches the code, that kind of I'd like to know, right? But it doesn't mean they're not useful. But I'd like to know, hey, maybe they have a different kind of role, and is this correct, or are they just like paid to do code changes and not doing code changes? Then we have a bigger problem. Now, I think when the DORA metrics came along and more on the CI/CD, it was more about the flow. Like, can I get something to production? Can I learn from production? can I do a change? How long is it going to take me to do that change? So those metrics kind of took the upper hand. But on the other hand, if you say, hey, I'm doing 10,000 deploys a day, that's meaningless as well, right? If you only look at that metric, like it's a vanity metric, or they're kind of gameable in certain ways. So I just urge to kind of like look and have various kind of metrics, and then kind of like based on what you see in the metrics, you build a hypothesis on what you want to make your decision on. The other day I got a question like, do you really need the DORA metrics anymore on the AI? Because that's just like going to go on itself. And I'd argue that, do you still want to have something into production, right? Is it like, how long is it your agent taking? Okay, that's maybe instant, but how many bugs does it introduce? How many like customers did you lose? So even if the one metric is getting close to like perfect, the others kind of will fail. So that's why you kind of need to look at that, and they are still relevant, whether that's your code complexity or your lines of code that you produce. It's just like interpretation of the signal that is what kind of changes. There has been the idea about we try to measure developer productivity, but it's kind of like a very fuzzy thing, like, multiple things, and it's a nuanced thing, which is great. What do we do with AI? Like, one of the metrics that I see coming up is, how many times do I have to re-nudge the AI before it actually gets what I mean? Now, is that fair to say that is actually you're measuring the AI, or are you measuring your own effectiveness to say, hey, I'm giving the AI all the context, the thing it should do, and I'm just not like want that it mind reads what it's like I want, right? So that's again interpretation on like different metrics in there. But your security metrics still apply, your incidents still apply. So I don't think that goes away until maybe we don't run anything more in production. I asked on ChatGPT, can you come up with like very creative ways, or kind of like novel ways of kind of like dealing with code reviews? And it says, well, what if you republish your code every time? And then there's no time to do the review, and no necessity anymore to do a review because it's always different. Okay. All right. I don't think we're going to go there. You might not have any users left. Like, they don't like what they see. So,
we're almost coming to the end now, but I wanted to play a game with you here called the lightning round, where I'm going to give a series of questions, and you can interpret them as wildly or as widely as you would like, but you have to try and give an answer. So we're going to start off here. If there was one tool that you could ship to any product team or development team, what would it be?
I'm biased, but currently it would be Claude Code.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. We were just talking about metrics. What is one metric you think you can more or less ignore now, and a new metric that is becoming super important that you would focus on?
How many pods are in your cluster? No, I don't know. Just but I think it's the biggest underestimated thing is what's bringing in the value. Like that is still like a problem for engineers.
This one here, a little bit left field, but we're going to do it. AI incident response. What do you think AI incident response should include or look at that traditional security incident responses may have ignored or didn't focus on?
Yeah, a question I get often, and there's a lot of, obviously, we give the agent more docs, and it's kind of coming up with hypotheses. If it's only that, you could say it's a human on steroids. But if I think it actually spins up instances and comes up with hypothesis and tests hypothesis, then we are a step further in that way instead of just giving suggestions and handing that over to a human.
Yeah. And last one here, 2026 prediction. Will we have an agent orchestrator as kind of a core platform, or is it too early, or will we not have it all? Agent orchestrator meaning kind of an orchestration platform for all of the AI agents that we will be managing.
I think agent orchestrators for coding is already here.
Yeah. Okay. that one was easy. I might have to cut that one out.
Yeah.
But Patrick, I want to thank you so much for coming. You're full of wisdom, and I was really pleased that you agreed to come on here and talk to me. It was really awesome. So thanks for coming back, and I hope that one day I can twist your arm again and bring you back on the show. But thanks so much for being here and sharing your knowledge with us today.
Right. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.